Andrew. We're so glad to have so many great things going on lately. I know that several of our ladies are at the ladies retreat or have just come back from the ladies retreat as well. We also have some great things going on here in that every Sunday we're announcing new members, and I want to do that again this morning. I'm going to ask Dylan and Sarah Hancock to stand where they are. Well, there they are. There, I couldn't find them as I was scanning. And John Michael, yeah, let's welcome them. And Carol Ann coming soon. So thank you guys for standing up and welcome. We've been welcoming new members almost weekly over the past several weeks, and I just want to encourage you to take a minute to look around where you're sitting and see if there's a new face around, and maybe introduce yourself, get to know someone new, and encourage them and be encouraged by them, and I know that you will. Mark chapter 2. 18 through 22. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. And people came and said to him, to Jesus, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins." The kingdom of God has come. That is Jesus' announcement, the basis of his preaching in Mark chapter 1. Mark has already shown us the dramatic inbreaking of God's kingdom, where Jesus is driving out demons, he's healing the sick, he's proclaiming good news. And with this sort of entrance onto the scene, this kind of power, you might expect Jesus to ride into Jerusalem, to have his banners waving, to go to the temple steps, to march up them, and to say to those in charge, "Your time is up." Perhaps he might quote from one of the Psalms about the Son of God dashing the world powers with a rod of iron. Maybe a direct quote, "Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, for his wrath is quickly kindled." You can see him there on the steps saying to all the world powers, "The time has come, your time is up, enter the King." Instead, Mark says in chapter 2, verse 1, he returned to Capernaum. Capernaum is as far north as you can go in Galilee. And if you were looking at the map, you would see Jerusalem and way up north, all along the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee up here, and Capernaum up there at the very north. It's 100 miles away from Jerusalem. The kingdom has come, and Jesus is in Capernaum again. Maybe it's a good idea. I think I can understand wanting to go out into the favorable, distant, small church and try out your sermon a couple of times. Maybe get a couple of healings under your belt, Jesus, before you go to the city, to the big show. But by the end of chapter 1, Jesus has healed dozens, and he's preached his sermons many times in many villages. He's walking circles around the Sea of Galilee, preaching and teaching and healing. On to Jerusalem. The King has come. Let's get this show on the road. But Jesus is on the periphery. He's on the outskirts, not just geographically, but he's at his house in Mark chapter 2, and anybody that comes to the door, he's teaching and healing and talking to. Or in the case of that passage, anybody that comes to the door and finds they can't get in, so they come through the roof. It's an interesting thing that the first person Jesus ever forgave, I know he healed him too in the story, right? I know he healed him too. But the first person Jesus ever forgives in the Gospel of Mark is a paralyzed man, lowered in through the roof, who didn't even ask to be forgiven. A little while later, Jesus calls Levi to be his disciple straight from his tax collecting booth. Now this is quite a thing. A man who received his wealth from skimming coins off of his countrymen's wages. It gets worse still. Jesus apparently is eating regularly with a host of these Roman sellouts and people that Mark just calls sinners. I guess he thinks we know the type. Jesus is there and he's eating with them. What kind of kingdom is this, in other words, that comes twice to Capernaum before it ever comes to Jerusalem? What kind of kingdom is this? It's a kingdom on the outskirts, at the edges, and among the people we would least expect. You would think that Jesus couldn't get into much trouble associating with maybe the wrong kind of people, but way up in Galilee in these villages of fishermen. Yet even at the margins, there is something deeply concerning about what Jesus is doing and saying, and it's raising some serious objections and questions among the experts in the law, the religious authorities, or religious leaders as we sometimes call them, the Pharisees. The paralytic gets forgiven. Why does this man speak like that? Who can forgive sins but God alone? Jesus sits down for dinner. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? While everyone else is fasting, presumably they're concerned with holiness or something, focusing their mind. Jesus' disciples are eating lunch. Why don't you fast? For crying out loud, even John the Baptist's disciples are fasting. Why don't you fast? The Sabbath rolls around and the disciples are plucking a little bit of grain on their walk. Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? 4 times in this one chapter or chapter and a few verses. Why? 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 These are not questions. They're not curious. These are indictments against Jesus. There is desperation in their voice. We've got to cut this out now, they're saying. If this is how he conducts himself in Galilee, what when he comes to Jerusalem? This morning, let's think about the fact that anger sometimes has a way of masking fear. And the Pharisees are deeply afraid. They're afraid, and Jesus isn't helping the matter whatsoever. Because instead of sort of, massaging their concerns and their fears, instead, Jesus makes their fears come to life. He says, a new cloth is for new clothes. New wine is for new wineskins. It's actually worse than that. If you look closely in Mark 2, what he's saying, he says, the old garments will tear. The old wineskins will burst. Out with the old, in with the new. That kind of preaching, and I can envision Peter, even Peter, with his eyebrows raised, going, slow down, Jesus. Out with the old, in with the new. I've not come to patch things up or top things off, Jesus says. I'm here to make things new. 3 verse 1. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. After all of the whys, the religious leaders are simply silent, watching, hoping that Jesus will heal a man's withered hand, not for his joy, but so that they might have some reason to accuse him of violating the Sabbath. What does Jesus do in response when these leaders are uneasy about Jesus healing the suffering, even opposed to him healing the suffering? Listen, my friend, I know your hand is hurting you, but these folks are a little bit stuck in their ways about the Sabbath. They're not really big on me doing this for you today. Meet me here tomorrow and we'll take care of you. Listen, my friend, I'll walk with you to your house, and along the way we'll stop and we'll talk and I'll take care of you there. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand. Open your hand." Imagine this. The Pharisees walk out of the room and head for a meeting with their rivals, with a group of people completely ideologically opposed to them in nearly every way. The Pharisees were people of principle. They were what we might think of as religious conservatives. The Herodians were people of political pragmatism at best, seeking power and status and wealth through the state rather than through obedience to God's word. Apparently, Mark says, it is possible for religion and politics to conspire together to kill Jesus. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator, powerful enough to motivate one to kill. The easiest thing in the world on a day like today would be for us to look at these religious and political experts and scoff. How did they miss it? How could they not see? But we have our own ways of conspiring against Jesus, do we not? We have our own experts, and we make our own alliances. When Jesus starts talking about forgiveness, we might turn to the psychologist to explain to us boundaries and self-care. By the way, there's plenty of truth there, but there can also be a retreat there to self-preservation, to safety. When Jesus talks of generosity, we turn to the financial planner to remind us of our financial goals and plans. When he talks of sexual purity, we can turn to the biologist who can be quite helpful in explaining to us that desire is just biological, it's just chemical, and we simply can't help that. When Jesus blesses the poor, we can turn to the economists. When he teaches nonviolence, we can ask the political scientists and lawyers. And when he calls for loving one's enemy, well, we can turn to just about anybody who can qualify and nuance that down to something a bit more realistic. And soon, in all of the conspiring and evading the voice of Jesus in our conscience, is all but gone. Worse still, the voice of Jesus may merely be our own convictions in disguise. And Jesus stands in the synagogue, and he knows they're watching. And he knows that they will, in the end, kill him rather than hear him. He has that mixture, I think, of anger and grief that even we feel well up within us sometimes when we see something that is horribly unjust and wrong. But he turns back to the man before him. In his anger, in his grief over the hardness of heart, he turns to the man there before him in need. And he simply says, "Open up your hand. Stretch out your hand." Even in the face of human rebellion and resistance, Jesus is there, in other words, with new wine for those who will receive it. And this morning, I just want to ask you, isn't this the gospel, really? We humans are a hard-hearted, a closed-fisted bunch, aren't we? I mean, we think that the tighter we hold on to our plans, our group, our money, our time, that the tighter we can hold on, the safer and happier we'll be. And Jesus says, open your hand. And it's a scary thing to do if you don't really trust Jesus. Think of the man there with the actual withered hand. Think about when Jesus tells him to open up his hand. To try to open his hand is to take a risk. How embarrassing would it be to be a man with a withered hand stuck like this, and Jesus comes along and says, "Stretch out your hand," and you're there and you're trying and nothing happens. There's a risk there, even for this man. Maybe it would be safer not to try. And Jesus says, "Open your hand." Healing and transformation can begin when we let go and receive Jesus in his fullness. The new wine can only be received by those with open hands. And if you're here this morning and your heart has opened to Jesus, and you see in Jesus the one that can begin to set you right, begin to repair what you know has gone wrong in your own heart, you can be set free from the things that you are clinging to. Open your hands. Receive Jesus. Be immersed into Christ today as we stand and sing.